In this video, I want to introduce a very important paradox of confirmation. This is known as the paradox of the raven. The paradox of the ravens rests on two key assumptions, or two key principles. The first is the principle that a hypothesis of the form all A's are B's is confirmed by any positive instance. That is, any instance that is both an A and a B confirms the hypothesis that all A's are B's. I'll call this the IC principle for instance confirmation. So for example, a black raven confirms that all ravens are black. So the hypothesis is all ravens are black. When I see a black raven, that confirms that hypothesis. That raises the probability of that this hypothesis is true. Another example, a green emerald confirms the hypothesis that all emeralds are green. The second assumption is the following. If H and H prime are logically equivalent, then E confirms H implies that E confirms H prime. So if you have some evidence for a hypothesis, and that hypothesis is logically equivalent to another hypothesis, in the sense that those two hypotheses are true in exactly the same situations, then your evidence also confirms the other hypothesis H prime. So for example, the hypothesis all ravens are black is logically equivalent to the hypothesis that all non-black things are non-ravens. So one way to understand this, so all ravens are black says, for any object you give me, if it's a raven, then it's black. H prime says, for any object you give me, if it's not black, then it's not a raven. In terms of propositional logic or sentential logic, these two formulas are tautologically equivalent. If R implies B is true, that means not B implies not R is also true. If not B implies not R is true, that means R implies B is true. These formulas are tautologically equivalent. Now, these are not exactly equivalent to R implies B is not exactly what H says. H is a universal claim. It says, for any object you give me, if it's a raven, then it's black. H prime says, for any object you give me, any single object, if it's not black, then it's not a raven. Now, the paradox of the raven says these two principles, IC and EQ, lead to an absurd conclusion. So let's see. Consider a brown jacket. So I'm looking around my room and I see that I have a brown jacket laying on the floor over there. So the question is, does that confirm H, where H is all ravens are black? Well, let's see. IC implies that a brown jacket confirms all non-black things are non-ravens, because a brown jacket is a non-black thing, and that then does confirm this universal claim, all non-black things are non-ravens, because a brown jacket is a non-black thing that is a non-raven. So it's an instance of all non-black things are non-ravens. Now, all non-black things are non-ravens is equivalent to all ravens are black. So EC implies that a brown jacket must confirm all ravens are black. But that's puzzling, because we can run this same argument by using a blue jacket or a red carpet or a white chair or a silver computer or what have you. So how is it that I can learn something about the color of ravens by simply looking around my office and seeing what I have in my office? Because I see a bunch of non-black things. Those things are not ravens. That then seems to confirm all non-black things are non-ravens. That's equivalent to saying that all ravens are black. So looking around my room, I'm raising the probability that all ravens are black. But how can one do that without going outside and actually searching for ravens? So this is the paradox of the raven. So the question you're faced with is which of these principles, IC or EC, should you give up? Should you give up instance confirmation so that positive instances of universal claims do not necessarily confirm those universal claims? Or perhaps you should give up EC. So if you have some evidence for an hypothesis H, and H prime is logically equivalent to H, then maybe that evidence doesn't actually confirm H prime. Or perhaps there was some subtle mistake in the reasoning that I outlined in this video. I just want to end by pointing to two papers that draw an interesting connection between the Wasson selection task and this paradox of the ravens, or this paradox of confirmation. I'm not going to go through any of the details, but I just want to point out that these papers highlight the fact that perhaps the reasoning that leads people astray in the Wasson selection task is the same as, or at least very similar to, the reasoning that I just went through that leads people to think that a red jacket confirms that all ravens are black.